The letter arrived on a Tuesday, trembling in Ethan's hands as he stood frozen in his small Chicago apartment. "You are no longer my son," it read, each word a blade slicing through years of hope. His mother's elegant handwriting, once a source of comfort, now branded him an outcast for loving who he loved. Ethan Carter, 24, had always known his mother. Margaret clung to her rigid beliefs like a lifeline. A devout woman from a small Illinois town, she'd raised him on Bible verses and warnings of sin, her love fierce but conditional. When Ethan came out as gay at 18, her face had twisted with disgust, and she'd cast him out, leaving him to navigate the world alone. He'd built a life in Chicago, found love with Noah, and thought he'd moved on, until the letter arrived, demanding he return home. Margaret was dying, and she needed him. The train ride to Willow Creek felt like a journey to a past Ethan had buried. The flat Illinois fields stretched endlessly outside the window, mirroring the vast distance between who he was and who his mother wanted him to be. Noah sat beside him, his warm hand a quiet anchor. "You don't have to do this," Noah said, his green eyes steady. "She hurt you." "I know," Ethan whispered, staring at the letter's creases. "But she's my mom, and she's alone." The words felt hollow, yet they pulled him forward. Margaret's diagnosis, terminal cancer, 6 months left, had shattered her carefully ordered world. Her letter begged for help, but Ethan knew it came with a cost, facing the woman who'd rejected him for being himself. Willow Creek hadn't changed. The same white church steeple pierced the sky, the same diner served greasy burgers, and the same whispers followed Ethan as he stepped off the train. Noah's presence drew stares, two men holding hands in a town that clung to tradition like a dogma. Ethan's childhood home loomed at the edge of town, a modest house with peeling paint and a garden Margaret once tended with pride. Now, weeds choked the roses, a silent testament to her decline. Margaret opened the door, thinner than Ethan remembered, her face etched with pain and defiance. "You came," she said, her voice brittle. Her eyes flickered to Noah, then back to Ethan, a storm brewing behind her gaze. "I didn't expect him." "This is Noah," Ethan said, his tone firm but trembling. "My partner." The word hung in the air, a challenge. Margaret's lips tightened, but she stepped aside, letting them in. The house smelled of dust and medicine, a far cry from the warmth of Ethan's childhood memories. Photos of him as a boy lined the walls, but none past his teenage years, as if his life had ended when he came out. Over the next few days, Ethan and Noah settled into an uneasy routine. Ethan cooked, cleaned, and drove Margaret to doctor's appointments, while Noah offered quiet support, his presence a buffer against Margaret's sharp tongue. She refused to acknowledge Noah, addressing only Ethan, her words laced with judgment. "You could still change," she said one evening, her hands clutching a worn Bible. "God forgives if you repent." Ethan's chest tightened. "I'm not broken, Mom. I love Noah. That's not a sin." His voice cracked, betraying the hurt he'd carried for years. Margaret's eyes glistened, but she turned away, her silence louder than any rebuke. Noah, ever patient, urged Ethan to keep trying. "She's scared," he said one night as they lay in the guest room, the moonlight casting shadows on the ceiling. "She's losing everything, her health, her control. Maybe she's reaching for you in her own messed up way." Ethan wanted to believe him, but each cold glance from Margaret felt like a fresh wound. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, Ethan found a journal, his mother's, filled with entries from his childhood. Pages brimmed with her love for him, her fears of failing as a mother, her prayers for his happiness. But after his coming out, the entries grew sparse, filled with anguish over his choice. Ethan's tears fell as he read her words. "I've lost my son to sin, and I don't know how to bring him back." For the first time, he saw her not as a tyrant, but as a woman trapped by her own fears. That night, Ethan confronted her. "I found your journal," he said, holding it up. Margaret's face paled. "You wrote that you loved me, but you threw me away." "What?" Her hands trembled. "I thought I was saving you," she whispered. "I thought God wanted me to." Her voice broke, and for the first time, Ethan saw not just her pride, but her pain. It was a crack in the wall between them, small but real. As weeks passed, Margaret's health worsened. Ethan and Noah cared for her, their days filled with quiet moments of grace. Noah reading to her, Ethan cooking her favorite soup. Slowly, Margaret's defenses softened. She began to ask Noah about his life, his family, though her questions were cautious, tinged with unease. Ethan watched, torn between hope and skepticism. Could she change, or was this just desperation? One evening, as a storm raged outside, Margaret called Ethan to her bedside. "I was wrong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was protecting you, but I was protecting myself. I don't understand your life, Ethan, but I see how you love him, and I want to try." Her words hit Ethan like a wave, stirring a mix of relief and anger. "Why now?" he asked. "After all this time?" "Because I'm running out of it," she said, tears streaming down her face. "And I don't want to lose you again." Ethan stood frozen, his mother's words echoing in his mind. The storm outside rattled the windows, but the real tempest was within him. Years of rejection clashing with this fragile confession. He wanted to believe her, but trust was a bridge long burned. Margaret's apology hung in the air, delicate and untested. Ethan glanced at Noah, who nodded subtly, his presence a steady reminder of what they'd built together. "I need time," Ethan said finally, his voice thick. Margaret nodded, her eyes heavy with regret, and Ethan left the room, his heart a tangle of hope and hurt. The next morning, the house felt different, as if Margaret's words had shifted its foundation. Ethan and Noah continued their routine, medications, meals, small acts of care, but Ethan's thoughts churned. Could a woman so rooted in her beliefs truly change? He watched Margaret closely, searching for sincerity. She was weaker now, her movement slow, but she made an effort to speak to Noah, asking about his job as a graphic designer. Her questions were awkward, but they were a start. One afternoon, while Noah was at the grocery store, Margaret called Ethan to the living room. She sat in her armchair, a blanket draped over her thin frame, holding a photo album. "Sit," she said, patting the couch. Ethan hesitated, then joined her. She opened the album, revealing pictures of him as a child, gap-toothed smiles, birthday candles, moments of a life before their fracture. "I used to dream you'd have a family," she said softly. "A wife, kids. I thought that was God's plan." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I have a family, Mom. Noah is my family." She flinched but didn't look away. "I'm trying to understand, Ethan. It's hard. My whole life, I was taught." She trailed off, her fingers tracing a photo of Ethan at his high school graduation, the last time they'd been truly close. "I don't want to die with this wall between us." Her vulnerability disarmed him. For years, he'd seen her as unyielding, but now she seemed small, human. "I never wanted a wall," Ethan said. "You built it when you told me I was wrong for who I am." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I know, and I'm sorry." The words were raw, unpolished, but they carried weight. Ethan felt a flicker of hope, but it was tempered by years of pain. He wanted to forgive her, but forgiveness felt like letting go of the armor that had protected him. As days turned into weeks, Margaret's efforts grew. She asked Noah about his favorite books, listened when he spoke about his dreams, even laughed at his dry humor. Ethan watched, torn between gratitude and suspicion. Was this change real, or was it born of fear? Noah, ever the optimist, believed in her. "She's trying, Ethan," he said one night as they washed dishes together. "It's messy, but it's something." Ethan wanted to agree, but doubt lingered. He remembered the nights he'd cried himself to sleep after she disowned him, the years of building a life without her. Yet, seeing her now, frail, vulnerable, reaching for connection, he felt a pull to meet her halfway. One evening, Margaret asked them to join her at the town's annual harvest festival. Ethan hesitated. Willow Creek wasn't a place where two men could walk hand in hand without drawing eyes. But Margaret insisted, her voice firm despite her weakness. "I want to go with my son," she said, then paused. "And Noah." The festival was a blur of lights, music, and the scent of caramel apples. Ethan and Noah stayed close, their hands brushing but not quite holding, wary of the crowd's gaze. Margaret, in a wheelchair pushed by Ethan, seemed to notice. Halfway through the night, she reached for Noah's hand, her grip weak but deliberate. "Thank you for being here," she said, her voice barely audible over the music. Noah squeezed her hand, and Ethan's throat tightened. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a seismic shift. Back home, Margaret's energy faded. She spent more time in bed, her breath shallow, her words fewer. Ethan and Noah took turns reading to her, sharing stories of their life in Chicago. Their first date, their tiny apartment, their dreams of a future together. Margaret listened, her eyes soft, occasionally asking questions. "Do you think you'll get married?" she asked one day, her voice curious rather than judgmental. Ethan glanced at Noah, who smiled. "Maybe," Ethan said, "if it feels right." Margaret nodded, her expression unreadable. "I'd like to see that," she said quietly, and Ethan's heart stuttered. Was this acceptance, or just a dying woman's wish to make peace? As winter crept into Willow Creek, Margaret's condition deteriorated. Ethan found himself grappling with a truth he hadn't expected. He wanted her in his life, even after everything. But time was slipping away, and with it the chance to truly reconcile. Snow dusted Willow Creek, blanketing the town in silence. But Ethan's mind was anything but quiet. Margaret's small steps toward acceptance had stirred something in him, a longing for the mother he'd lost, tempered by the fear she'd hurt him again. Each day brought her closer to the end, and Ethan felt the weight of time pressing down. Noah remained his rock, his quiet strength a contrast to Ethan's turmoil. They'd taken to sitting on the porch at night, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars. "She's changing," Noah said one evening, his breath visible in the cold. "It's slow, but it's real." Ethan wanted to believe him, but the scars of rejection ran deep, and he wasn't sure he could trust her heart or his own. Margaret's days were now spent mostly in bed, her strength fading. Yet, she insisted on small rituals, listening to old records, sipping tea Ethan brewed, asking Noah about his art. One afternoon, she handed Ethan a small box. Inside was a silver watch, his father's, given to her before he died when Ethan was a boy. "I want you to have it," she said. "You're the best part of me, Ethan. I was wrong to push you away." The words hit like a punch. Ethan clutched the watch, its weight grounding him. "Why didn't you try sooner?" he asked, his voice raw. "I needed you." Margaret's eyes glistened. "I was afraid. Of God, of what people would think, of losing the world I knew. But I lost you instead." Her voice cracked, and she reached for his hand. "I'm so sorry, Ethan." He let her hold his hand, the warmth of her touch unfamiliar, yet achingly familiar. For the first time, he saw her not as the woman who'd rejected him, but as someone grappling with her own flaws, trying to make amends before it was too late. It didn't erase the pain, but it softened its edges. Noah, watching from the doorway, gave Ethan a small smile, as if to say, "See? She's trying." Ethan nodded, his heart caught between forgiveness and caution. He wanted to believe in her, but years of hurt didn't vanish overnight. As Christmas approached, Margaret rallied enough to ask for a tree. Ethan and Noah dragged a small pine into the living room, decorating it with ornaments from Ethan's childhood. Margaret watched, her eyes bright with memories. "You loved Christmas," she said to Ethan. "You'd beg to open one present early." Ethan laughed, the sound surprising him. "You never let me." For a moment, it felt like the past was within reach. Not perfect, but theirs. That night, Margaret asked Noah to stay after Ethan went to bed. Ethan, unable to sleep, overheard their conversation through the thin walls. "You're good for him," Margaret said, her voice weak but clear. "I see how you love him. I was wrong to judge." Noah's reply was soft. "He's worth it, Margaret. He's always been worth it." Ethan's eyes burned with tears. He wanted to burst in, to hug them both, but he stayed still, letting the moment settle in his heart. It was the closest he'd felt a hole in years. But the peace was fleeting. A week later, Margaret's condition worsened sharply. The doctor warned that her time was down to days. Ethan and Noah took shifts by her bedside, reading, talking, or simply sitting in silence. Margaret's moments of clarity grew rare, but when they came, she reached for Ethan's hand, her grip weak but desperate. "I'm proud of you," she whispered one night, her eyes locked on his. "I should have said it sooner." Ethan's throat closed. "I love you, Mom," he managed, the words heavy with years of longing. She smiled, a small, tired curve of her lips, and Ethan knew it was the closest they'd come to healing. As her final days loomed, Ethan faced a choice of his own. He could hold on to the pain, guarding his heart against further hurt, or he could embrace this fragile reconciliation, knowing it might be all they'd ever have. Noah, ever perceptive, saw the struggle in Ethan's eyes. "You don't have to forgive her completely," he said, "but you can love her for who she's trying to be now." Ethan nodded, tears falling. He didn't know if he could fully forgive, but he could try to love her through the pain, just as she was trying to love him through her mistakes. Margaret's breaths grew shallower, each one a reminder of time slipping away. Ethan sat by her bed, the silver watch ticking softly in his pocket, a tether to the past and the present. He wanted to hold onto every moment, even the painful ones, because they were all he had left of her. Noah stayed close, his presence a quiet strength as Ethan navigated the storm of emotions. The house, once a place of rejection, now felt like a fragile sanctuary where they were stitching together something new. Margaret's apologies, her small gestures toward Noah, her tearful confessions. They were imperfect, but they were real. Ethan clung to them, even as doubt whispered that it might be too late. One morning, Margaret asked for a walk in the garden, though she could barely sit up. Ethan and Noah carried her outside in a blanket, settling her in a chair among the overgrown roses. The winter air was sharp, but Margaret's face lit up, her eyes tracing the garden she'd once loved. "I used to imagine you here," she said to Ethan, playing, laughing. "I thought I'd always be part of your life." "You still are," Ethan said, his voice catching. "Even when it hurt, You were part of me. Margaret reached for Noah's hand, surprising them both. You're part of him too, she said. I see that now. Noah's eyes glistened, and Ethan felt a lump in his throat. It was the first time she'd acknowledged their love without hesitation, and it felt like a gift. That night, Margaret asked Ethan to read from her journal again. He chose an entry from when he was 10, about a day they'd spent baking cookies, laughing until flour dusted their hair. As he read, Margaret's eyes softened, lost in the memory. I want you to remember me like that, she said. Not the me who hurt you. I'll remember all of you, Ethan said, his voice breaking. The good and the bad. It's all you, Mom. She smiled, weak but genuine, and Ethan knew they'd reached a turning point. It wasn't full forgiveness, some wounds ran too deep, but it was understanding, a bridge built from pain to something softer. As January dawned, Margaret's time grew shorter. The hospice nurse visited daily, her updates grim. Ethan and Noah filled the house with small comforts, fresh flowers, soft music, stories of their life in Chicago. Margaret listened, her questions growing bolder. Do you think you'll adopt one day? She asked Noah one evening, her voice faint but curious. Noah grinned. Maybe. Ethan's great with kids. He'd be an amazing dad. Margaret nodded, a flicker of pride in her eyes. He would, she said, looking at Ethan. You will. The words were a balm, soothing years of doubt. Ethan had spent so long believing he'd failed her, but now he saw she'd been fighting her own battles, against fear, against a worldview that had shaped her. Her acceptance, incomplete as it was her way of fighting for him now. One night, as a blizzard howled outside, Margaret called them both to her side. I need to say this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I was wrong. About you, about Noah, about everything. I love you, Ethan. And I'm grateful for you, Noah. Her eyes fluttered closed, her strength spent. Ethan and Noah held her hands, tears streaming down their faces. We love you too, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. Margaret's lips curved into a faint smile, and she drifted into sleep. The next morning, she was gone. Ethan sat by her bed, the silence deafening, the watch in his pocket a heavy reminder of her presence. Noah wrapped an arm around him, and they sat together, grieving not just her death, but the years they'd lost and the moments they'd reclaimed. Ethan knew he'd carry the pain of her rejection forever, but he'd also carry her final words, her efforts to change, her love, however late it came. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was theirs. The funeral was small, held in the white church Margaret had loved, though Ethan insisted on a service that honored her complexity, not just her faith, but her journey toward understanding. He and Noah stood side by side, their hands clasped, ignoring the whispers from old neighbors. Ethan spoke, his voice steady as he shared memories of her laughter, her garden, her final days of trying to make things right. Back in Chicago, the apartment felt emptier, though it was filled with reminders of their time in Willow Creek. The watch, the journal, a photo of the three of them at the Harvest Festival. Ethan kept the watch on his nightstand, its ticking a quiet companion through sleepless nights. He and Noah talked often about Margaret, about the pain she'd caused and the love she'd tried to give in the end. It was a bittersweet healing, one that left Ethan stronger but forever marked. One spring evening, Ethan and Noah walked through a Chicago park, the same one where they'd shared their first kiss. The air was warm, the trees budding with new life. Ethan stopped by a bench, pulling Noah close. She'd have liked this, he said, gesturing to the sunset. She'd have liked us here, together. Noah smiled, his eyes soft. She did in her way. She saw us, Ethan. That's what matters. Ethan nodded, his heart full. Margaret's rejection had shaped him, but so had her final efforts to understand. He'd learned that love could be messy, imperfect, but still worth fighting for. He and Noah had built a life stronger than the pain, and now they carried her memory as part of it, not as a wound, but as a story of redemption. They sat on the bench, hands intertwined, watching the sky shift from gold to purple. Ethan thought of the journal, the watch, the small moments that had bridged the gap between him and his mother. He thought of her last words, her frail hand in his, her acknowledgement of Noah. It wasn't everything he'd wanted, but it was enough to move forward. As they walked home, Ethan felt a quiet resolve. He'd honor Margaret by living fully, loving fiercely, and never hiding who he was. Her choice in the end, between pride and survival, had been to choose love, however imperfectly, and Ethan would do the same. He squeezed Noah's hand, the future stretching before them. They'd face it together, carrying the weight of the past and the hope of what could be. In that moment, Ethan knew he was whole, not because the pain was gone, but because he'd found a way to live with it, to love through it, and to build a life that honored every part of who he was.